Hello, everybody, and welcome to PGN's Par 4. Doing it solo this week, Zachary Weiss here, without Matt Geica. He's on assignment, so to speak, so you're stuck with me for better or for worse. So I guess there's a little bit less give and take, and just we'll go through the four shots like we do every week as best as I can here. And we'll start with the obvious, which is PGA Tour does Harding Park, and the winner is Collin Morikawa, who had some trials and tribulations, so to speak, going up and down, kind of, and had the loss in the playoff to Daniel Berger in heartbreaking fashion, and came back and won the Workday Charity Open, the first of two, so to speak, at Muirfield Village Golf Club, and Collin Morikawa gets the hometown-ish victory, which was a very, very thrilling must-watch television down the stretch. You had a lot of guys that were in it. You had a logjam leaderboard with five tied at -10. But Collin Morikawa takes it, and a lot of people are going to look at that shot on 16. It's a tee shot on 16. It's an intimidating shot in the sense that it challenges you and makes you want to pull out that driver or try to play a cut and get the ball in the green. And when you're making a move in a logjam leaderboard like what Collin and several others were trying to do, you try to pull the driver. And one thing that really seemed to play to Morikawa's strength was he didn't have to really finesse a shot. You have a guy like Cameron Champ in his group that's known for his length, and he has to play a cut and maybe be a little bit more creative, whereas Collin Morikawa, he's not a short hitter by any means, but the guy plays right to his yardage, and when you add the cold and the wind, he just pretty much got to go right at it. And really, the most impressive part of the shot was not necessarily the shot himself, but here's Morikawa, a 23-year-old, holding his nerve in his first PGA Championship, and the result was what it was. And I know that Morikawa is not much of necessarily a putter, but you couldn't tell it based on how he stroked that putt on the 16th green. Just not only did it go in, but it pretty much was right down the middle of the cup. And really, as a competitor, you really don't want anything more than that. It was message clearly sent. From there, it was just play mistake-free golf and the tournament's yours. But early on in the front nine, really, Morikawa really won this championship, so to speak. Huge par save at 1, huge par save, I believe, at number 6. Those were 20, 30-foot putts. And when you look at it, I know it's early in the round, but when you look at a logjam leaderboard, you look for the story. You look for a guy that's really avoided the big mistake, and Morikawa had a chance to make those mistakes and have to cut his work out even harder for himself. And the way that he's able to pass both of those two tests really set him up well for that 16th hole, which played right to his strengths. I know Morikawa is more of an iron player, possibly still the best one on tour. It's something that I mentioned to Matt last week on an earlier shot when we did our previous PGN Par 4 video, but what it is, it's true. He's a very good ball striker. It's very clear that the moment does not faze him. And look, he's a kid that easily had so much talent through the amateur and collegiate circuit that he could have left early, but he wanted to get his degree, and that really speaks to who he is as an individual. And the chance for him to be a star is even more realistic now than it was before, and it seemed like there were signs before. So good on Collin Morikawa, the first major of potentially many. We'll just have to see how his career goes, but now he kind of breaks out of that shadow with Matthew Wolff, with Victor Hovland. All three have been very fine, distinguished professionals thus far early in their young careers, but it's Morikawa that breaks through first, and in a very, very big way in golf's first major of the year. Still weird to say it as a PGA Championship. As far as TPC Harding Park handled itself, I think when you look at the leaderboard, you have Morikawa, a guy that's that finesseful iron player. You have Dustin Johnson, maybe known more for his driving ability. And then you look at Paul Casey, who's more of that all-round guy that's able to methodically, I don't want to say creep, but methodically manage and navigate his way across the leaderboard, where he's a gentleman that's in his 40s and he's able to still have the game. And really, a hole like 16 maybe not be the hole for him, but it was definitely a hole for Morikawa. And when Casey, the competitor, sees Morikawa strike the shot that he does on 16, as he said to Amanda Bailionis on the post-round broadcast, all you can do is tip your hat and applaud. It's a hole that was set up for him, and I think when you see the leaderboard earlier and you see guys like Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka, Tony Finau is up there, Bryson DeChambeau is up there and threatening the lead for much of the back nine, I think it seems pretty clear-cut that you're going to say, hey, this is a bomber's course, but these things in majors tend to even out, and I think the equalizer was that accuracy with that weather. And Cameron Champ played the longest, but in that final round he didn't really appear. DeChambeau with a couple of flinches. We'll get to Brooks Koepka later on. Tiger Woods never really amounted to much. He kind of had some ups and downs, some struggles with some putters. It was clear that later on Joey LaCava's caddy said that, hey, he does need more reps, and I think that was the elephant in the room, and I think now that it's getting towards that schedule time, that FedEx Cup schedule time with majors looming around the corner, it's going to be more get up and go time. It's a little bit more later than usual than what you see at a Tiger Woods, but almost out of necessity, this is what it is. So again, it was very, very interesting. A lot of storylines, also including Phil Mickelson on commentary, which was an interesting thing to see. Maybe a potential peek into the future. If that avenue suits him, I mean, he was bored. He wanted to see the leaders and show some personality, and it was a very nice and needed sight when Tiger Woods is not on the leaderboard and you have a kind of an uneven leaderboard. But I said last week that I didn't think the big names were necessarily going to show up, and I was wrong, and good on them. They mostly largely showed up ready to play. I mean, neither Matt nor myself's picks really did all that well. I believe a T37 both ways, so goes to show you how much we know. So I guess next time you get your DraftKings going, the law firm of Geica and Weiss, not the way to go, but hey, that's okay. What can you do? And now for the second shot, and this one more on my end of the spectrum, the LPGA with the Marathon LPGA Classic, which took place at Highland Meadows Golf Club. It was Danielle Kang who won. Of course, most people look at the storyline of Lydia Ko, who almost essentially led this from wire to wire, and heading to the 13th hole was 5 up. It essentially was a match play situation, and Lydia Ko, looking for her first win since 2018, unable to do so, and it kind of outlined some of the struggles she had to get to this point, but it seemed like the 18th, just she could not catch a break, from the drop to the sculled shot to how she played out of the bunker. It was a little bit on the erratic side, and it was very unflappable for someone who, despite her inconsistencies and struggles in recent years, has had one of the best short games on the LPGA Tour. Danielle Kang has just been a force since the LPGA has resumed these 2 weeks, being able to take both Ohio events and give herself some momentum heading to Scotland, where overseas she necessarily hasn't fared as well, but now ranked second in the Rolex rankings. It's really, really good sign for her that she didn't panic. Yes, Lydia flinched a little bit, but Danielle made 3 birdies. She got up and down from the bunker, was able to get down to that par on the 72nd hole, which did set up the win. I know those two are friends, and I know there were some conflicting thoughts. Obviously, you want the win, but you don't necessarily want the win that way. So, obviously, it's tough to see that happen. Also, some other good storylines. Marina Alex making her return after a positive COVID diagnosis kept her out of the Inverness Golf Club, the LPGA Drive-On Championship. And 10 players also were able to make the AIG Women's Open, which is essentially the Women's British Open, which will be played next week at Royal Troon. Among those, Maria Fossey, who I wrote a feature on earlier on this past week, which you can read, of course, at PittsburghGolfNow.com, among other things. It was also a good tournament just for me. I personally have mentioned this several times. I don't know if it made the final cut, but personally, I treated these 2 days in Toledo that I was there as if, unfortunately, it's the last live event of magnitude I'm going to cover in 2020, especially now with football's announcements in the collegiate spectrum. I think the NFL is going to try something, at least starting the season, but basketball is really up in the air. A couple people I've talked to have said maybe January, maybe end of January, but it's almost like the vaccine is the great pumpkin. Not trying to get too political here, so we'll have to see how that goes, but coverage in a bubble was interesting. I was wondering what adjustments were going to be made, and for golf, there were some that were noticeable, but I really don't think it affected my coverage all that much. We still had the exact same amount of access where we were able to approach players after rounds with distance, of course. Flash interviews remained the same, but of course masks were present for reporters, and the LPGA Tour players wore masks as they passed us, and only when they got to this little half table were they allowed to discard their mask for the interview. But really, there wasn't much change. I mean, there were less volunteers, very noticeable. Of course, no fans, incredibly noticeable. The walkways being unattended. I wrote an article on it that you can get more information with pictures of pretty much everything, from the shield separating the 2x2 seating in the media area. I didn't take pictures of the media lunch. I figured y'all did not want to see that, but there were grab-and-go lunches, which was different as opposed to the big spread that a lot of times media is accustomed to wherever they may travel. Of course, there was no inside the ropes for media, so that part in my aspect made it a little bit tougher. But when there's nobody save for volunteers and tournament officials and all that fun, really you still are able to get a lot of dialogue for the most part. It was interesting. There was a golfer on, I believe it was the 7th green, and there was a golfer on, I want to say that was the 16th, 15th, 16th hole. They were parallel to each other, but there was enough proximity that two of the volunteers by 7 green were chatting, by 16 green were chatting, and there was a caddy, Amy McDonald's caddy on 7, told them to quiet down. So that's how much the noise was noticeable. So it was really just keeping quiet and keeping to a minimum, and I kept it quiet. Personally, the masks were mandatory inside for everybody. Outside was optional. I chose to keep mine on the whole time, just out of abundance of caution. First of all, I'm in a bubble for 2 days that I'm not used to being in. They're trusting me to be in that bubble. But also more so just respect to everybody around me, etc., etc. Just a huge thanks to the LPGA media staff. All three were able to really, really help me in my coverage and trusted me as if I was there every single week, and hopefully I'm there more often. It was a joy to cover, and it was a joy to get some angles, writing a couple, 2 or 3 stories plus a day, which, considering what I was doing and walking and trying to essentially be a one-man band, it felt like old times almost, even with the restrictions. But I know it's kind of cringeworthy to say it's the new normal, but pretty much that's what it is. This is what it's going to be for now if you're going to cover an event of any magnitude. Baseball, golf, whatever the case may be. I mean, masks are going to be prevalent. There's going to be restrictions, but you just have to roll through those restrictions. And fortunately with golf, although the rules were specific, like temperature screenings, or maybe you had to fill out questionnaires and with other tours, they're necessary at this point. And with golf, you're able to distance, but obviously there's other sports where there's more of an issue and maybe more initiative will be taken. But honestly, I didn't mind the coverage, and if this is the new normal, then so be it. I didn't have much problem, honestly, covering it. It was a joy to cover, and I don't regret my decision one bit, and I appreciate Matt for the trust in letting me go, and it was just good to go back out there and get some reps again. It's been a while since I've covered a golf tournament. The Memorial this year just didn't happen for me, so just there was no space, and of course social distance and safety. Sorry, phone botch. This isn't a perfect production. It's literally behind the scenes here. It's just me with a card back. So that was great. That was great. Let me lean back here. But yeah, that was the new normal, unfortunately. So it was good. Fortunately and unfortunately, I'm just fortunate that I got to cover something all over again. And although this is probably it this year, I don't think Akron's happening this week. Columbus, they're restricting by mileage, and really, I think by proximity, that's it. I mean, Ohio's been a great host for all these professional golf tours, and it seems like early returns were good. The players were happy. There were no positive tests leaving Ohio on the LPGA tour, and really Danielle King won in a, you don't want to say thrilling fashion because you feel for Lydia Ko, but these 2 weeks for the LPGA have gone off without a hitch for the most part. A couple positive tests and a couple withdrew at a precaution, but really not much more you can ask. So good on the LPGA. Thank you to the LPGA for their trust in me, both in coverage and both in terms of trusting me to cover inside of such a restricted bubble. It was weird not having fans, but it made it much easier for me to maneuver without having the inside the ropes access. So it did feel weird, and I think I even mentioned in the article there was an Uber driver that hasn't missed a tournament missed the tournament in 2 decades, and this was his first time missing it, and he was very sad, but he was just happy to see someone was going to the tournament and enjoying. And hopefully next year the tournament will be back, and the 9 and 18 grandstands will be back in full force. I mean, Toledo will be really popping between that and the Solheim Cup next year. Teeing it off for the third shot, we'll go to another project that I dealt with while I was in Toledo, and before that even was good following around Marisa Kirkwood, so to speak. Another thank you goes out to the USGA, specifically Joey Gieske. I hope I pronounced your last name right, Joey, for his help this week in tracking Marisa down for me. With the USGA, obviously, I could not go to Rockville, Maryland, and I think given what had happened earlier in the week with Hurricane Isaias, it's a good thing I didn't. They completely had a day of play washed out, and there was a lengthy-ish rain delay the first day on Monday of competition, so Marisa attends Kent State. She graduated, but she has more eligibility, and she resides in Newcastle, so she's on that Pennsylvania-Ohio border, and she has those Western Pennsylvanian ties, so that's where it clicked in. And the USGA this year, seeing that there was a shortage of media, obviously given the bubble and the current situation with everything around the world, they put out a request that if you wanted to interview anybody, that they would understand those accommodations, ask for those who you would like to interview, and plan accordingly. And Joey was really patient with me. Monday it wasn't able to happen as she finished her first round at even par. It was 2 rounds and then match play, and she was even par. She actually eagled, I want to say it was the 7th hole. I don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry, but she had some definite highlights and she was right in that conversation. But unfortunately, due to the rain delay, we actually didn't get to do an interview until Wednesday because Tuesday was the rain, and Monday she just barely beat the darkness. So by the time we got to talk on Wednesday, she had already qualified for match play, which was good because it was her 3rd tournament in as many weeks. She had done a couple of Eastern Amateur and Women's Amateur, and I believe there was another Directional Amateur that she did, and this was her 3rd tournament in as many weeks, and she hasn't had a rush like that in quite some time, if ever, and it ends with her making it in match play, which is a great accomplishment for her. And of course she had done it 2 weeks before, and I think she did well in the stroke play. I think she was ranked 11th in that a couple of weeks prior, but unfortunately fell in the first round of match play. And this time she made a run, and it was really good for her to advance a couple days, and she ended up losing in the, I believe it was the round of 32, round of 16, round of 32, I believe it was. No, she lost in the round of 16, so she made it quite a run. It was really, really good for her to make a really good run into the tournament and represent Western Pennsylvania golf that way. So it was good for her, good on her for being able to accomplish that. That is not an easy feat by any stretch of the imagination, but for Marisa to be able to do that really in a USGA caliber field, I know the way that she lost was a little bit on the disappointing side probably for her to lose in the round of 32. But really, I mean, it was a class performance on her part. It just was unfortunate for her. She just ran into a buzzsaw with Aliyah Abdelghani, and that's a very, very tough player in a very, very perennial program. So she has nothing to be ashamed of, and it'll be interesting to see. We'll try to follow her story as well as many other stories. I know the men's amateur just finished their 2nd round of play at the time of this recording, which was in Oregon, so you had the time zone to deal with, but didn't seem like many of the Western Pennsylvanian golfers really had too much luck over there in Bandon, Oregon. So we'll continue to follow the proceedings as everything continues to move forward. But an interesting side note is that the U.S. men's amateur will actually be at Oakmont Country Club next year. So perhaps Matt and I can do some coverage. Maybe that's a tease down the line. So definitely follow PGN for that as the date nears on that end. And lastly, the 4th shot, Brooks Koepka with some very interesting remarks at the end of the 3rd round. And essentially he went his Chad Ochocinco. I see a leaderboard and I don't see many major winners. Dustin Johnson won 1 major, but that was in 2016. So Brooks Koepka has not been afraid to tee off, whether it's Bryson DeChambeau or on Saturday night where he had a chance to continue to be a defending major champion. And he has not been dethroned really as a defending major champion. I know he lost other majors, but in this capacity in quite some time. And really, of all those guys that were on that first page, only one didn't show up, and that was the one with the most majors, Brooks Koepka. And it was really ironic that he talked the talk, but couldn't finish the walk, and it's unfortunate for him, but I mean, hey, it was good for golf that he spoke out, and I think a lot of times golfers are either afraid to speak or they don't want to make those predictions, but that's what Brooks Koepka does, and you know what? He's earned every single right of it, and Sunday wasn't necessarily his day. He had a tough start, and he really largely couldn't recover, but hey, I mean, you can't fault the man for trying, and it was good for him. I mean, he probably didn't get as much TV time as I'm sure he would have thought that he would have, and he definitely wasn't lifting a trophy at the end. But anytime Brooks Koepka is on the first page of a leaderboard in a major championship, you still fear him, you still respect him, and you still have to keep an eye out for what he's doing, especially on a Sunday. So he put himself in position again, and I know what happened. He was disappointed after not being able to get anything done at the WGC FedEx St. Jude Classic with turning it over on Sunday, and he kind of lost that advantage to Justin Thomas, who kind of took advantage and took from there. But this is the time that Brooks Koepka's trending, and we'll have to see how his game proceeds forward. But in this case, it's just seemed like a rare miss. This year's been a little bit kind of heebie-jeebie. He hasn't been healthy. His play hasn't been the greatest. Now he's 100% healthy. It seems like he's starting to put the finishes together. But again, the week turns out to be Collin Morikawa's, and definitely not Brooks Koepka. Ended up in the 20s in terms of placement, so honestly not the best of weeks for him. So we'll have to see how everything goes, and let the chips fall where they may as the rest of this golf season continues on. One last note before we end up our PGN's Par 4 coverage for the week. Just Moon Open, our own Matt Geica will be teeing it up this weekend after he gets some work done on and off the course. So we'll follow Matt and everybody else in the Moon Open. And for everybody else at PGN, this is your Par 4 for the week. This is Zachary Weiss. Hit him straight. Get him in the hole. Let's see some circles on the scorecards. Have a good week, everybody.